is the conclusion of the author on executive authority and what does it actually mean. And this is from the Columbia Journalism or the Columbia Law Review. When a moderately educated 18th century reader, or really any literate American with access to a dictionary, saw the phrase executive power, they would have understood it as the power to execute plans, instructions, and above all else, the laws. Then they would have understood the power as an empty vessel whose authority in any particular case depended entirely on the substantive decisions of the entity which possessed the legislative power to direct executive action. That's certainly not to say we've arrived at a comprehensive historical account of Article 2 as drafted. What settlement on presidential power did the drafting framers think they had reached? What arrangement did the ratifying founders think they were voting on? Now, again, folks, ladies and gentlemen, don't tune out here. You people that just, I don't want to hear that. Yes, you do. Because I'm going to give you the legal reasons why Trump can bring about, and so could any president, pretty much an agency created by an executive authority. If it had the authority to create it, has the authority to uncreate it. Congress vested in the president and that Foreign Affairs Act the authority to execute that law, and if he needed to bring into existence an agency to administer their foreign policy appropriation or whatever, he could do so. He did. Kennedy did it. He called it USAID. If Kennedy had the authority to take Congress's instruction, we want you to do this, and create an agency, then he had the power to name all the people that work for the agency, how much they would be paid. Everything that agency was to do, John F. Kennedy had the power to do. He also had the power to choose, in his own wisdom, not to do. This is the finality of what this woman... Is this a woman? I forget. Who wrote this piece? Julian. It is a woman, isn't it?
Julian David.
Oh, Julian. David.
Davis Mortensen.
A detailed answer requires a deep engagement with a completely different set of historical materials and perhaps a sturdier sense of civic confidence than the royal residuum. That's a principle we're not going to get into. That's what the divine right of kings, what kings could do, supposedly. This seems to possess the royal residuum thesis seems to possess, but it is surely worth saying something about the power besides its bare semantic meaning, namely a word on its contemptuous reception by theorists who yearn for a king. Because if mere execution is all there is to it, then wasn't this a rather milquetoast role? When Chief Justice Vinson called the merely executive president an impotent automaton or messenger boy, and when the arch-royalist Filmer dripped with disdain about a mere executive power, weren't they right? Didn't at least some founders think so too? Take Charles Pinckney, who, at the Federal Convention, objected to the contemptible weakness and dependence of the executive that was created by Article 2. That's certainly Harvey Mansfield's view. If any real president confined himself to this definition, he would be contemptuously called an errand boy, considered nothing in himself, a mere agent whose duty is to command actions according to the law. I don't think so. Certainly it's wrong today. So, in other words, just saying that all you can do as president is execute the law is bogus. The modern statutory framework conveys a staggering amount of discretionary policy power to the executive branch. Very few of the legal constraints imposed on these delegated authorities are so precise as to rule out a politically plausible policy option in the realm of national security and foreign affairs. Now, they're kind of concentrating here. I believe he wrote this piece when Obama was bombing Libya. And to answer the question as to whether or not Obama could just and Rand Paul said he couldn't, by the stroke of a pen bomb the Libyans. Of course, I don't think that he can either. But it was obtuse in the 18th century as well. The executive power has never been anything less than the nation's force mustered in service of the nation's will. Now, many of you have been listening for a long time, so you know this exercise. Alien friend, alien enemy. Alien friend, alien enemy. What's the difference? Alien friend. Hi, friend. E.T. phone home, friend. Who's an alien friend? Citizen of France. Alien friend. Who's an alien friend? Well, until last week, a citizen of Canada. Who's an alien friend? Insert country here. Who's an alien enemy? A member of the cartels? A member of ISIS? If the United States was at war with a country, every citizen of that country would be an alien enemy. Miniature play, I don't get it. Why does it matter? That's why you're here for Civics 101. It matters because it matters in how we treat people. Obviously, an alien friend has certain privileges and immunities. And you know how many an alien enemy has? Almost none.
0.0.
Now, he may have international law protecting him that you can't just execute him or you can't just imprison him, you can't torture him, etc., but that's pretty much it. So it's an important distinction. Well, here's another important distinction in executive power. Internal executive power, external executive power. Internal, obviously, is USAID. External is finding a place for the Gazans to live and making the deal so that they can move there. When the president is conducting external executive authority, he is acting on your, my, and Congress's behalf at that point. So he at least has to try and faithfully, if he was given a statute by Congress, then he has to conduct himself according to that statute. There is no statute here in dispersing funds. No president it would be vetoed. It would never get through. So we're almost done here. It's a brief exercise. I think that these things matter from time to time. We ought to talk about them. The executive power has never been anything less than the nation's force mustered in service of the nation's will. That was why many authors saw England not only as being the freest and happiest of countries, but also as the country whose ruler was in fact the most powerful. Indeed, and perhaps ironically, the crown could direct the power of a peerlessly vigorous nation that flourished precisely because of the various formal limitations on royal authority. At a minimum, Founding Father James Wilson observed, the president's powers were clearly, quote, of such a nature as to place him above expressions of contempt. Close quote. Some anti-federalists made far less sanguine versions of the same point. Quote, though not dignified with the magic name of king, he will possess more supreme power than Great Britain allows her hereditary monarchs. Close quote. Remember the famous line from my movie, The Spirit of 76? He will have extravagant powers, the powers of a king. He is be supported in extravagant magnificence, etc., etc. Even James Madison, who it turns out had read a lot of the books that are on his bookshelf that was discussed earlier in the article, saw what was coming. He warned that the president would likely wind up with tyrannical power in his executive capacity if Congress's legislative authority were not limited. I think that this is the point right here. For those that want to limit the power of the president to execute the laws and to do what Trump is doing, then they never should have made the laws so voluminous and complex. When Congress did that, it literally expanded the scope of what the executive can do. Does everyone follow this? You couldn't say an executive can only say yay or nay to simple yay or nay, yes or no questions when the questions turn from yes or no into, well, I have the answer in triplicate, part 3700, subsection 410, clause triple B, subsection 43. You cannot therefore expect that the executive is bound to the simple, I signed the law. They told me to execute it, so I executed the law on this agency, and I didn't do anything else. Here's Madison. Quote, One consequence must be to enlarge the sphere of discretion allotted to the executive magistrate. Even within the legislative limits properly defined by the Constitution, the difficulty of accommodating legal regulations to a country so great in extent and so various in its circumstances has been much felt and has led to occasional investments of power in the executive, which involve perhaps as large a portion of discretion as can be deemed consistent with the nature of the executive trust. Now, he's writing this in 1799. We're 10 years in on the game. In proportion as the objects of legislative care might be multiplied, with the time allowed for each be diminished, and the difficulty of providing uniform and particular regulations for all be increased. In other words, there's no way Congress in that voluminous of a law could possibly tell the president what he can or cannot do to faithfully execute the law. That's what Madison is saying here. So, it is in the executive power. He has to determine it. From these sources would necessarily ensue a greater latitude to the agency of that department, which is always in existence, and which could best mold regulations of a general nature so as to suit them to the diversity of particular situations. In other words, you'd have to limit him by statute, and they didn't. It is worth noting. And the reason is because when you're knowledgeable about these things, and you know when someone's being a troll, you can just call them and go, no, dude, you're not thinking about it correctly. And I genuinely mean that. They expanded the laws and made them so voluminous, it takes an executive with concurrent. If Congress steps outside of its Article 1, Section 8 box, in other words, and they did, and they still are, well, then the president must accordingly adjust. His Article 2, Section 2 powers then must adjust to where they are. Now, you hope that the courts rein all this in,